What is something you witnessed that has completely horrified you? Story 1. When I was 4, I witnessed my grandmother get horribly burned. It was Father's Day, and she was lighting a charcoal grill. I guess there was a buildup of fumes from the lighter fluid, and a gas ball came back and burned her from her neck down to mid-waist. I was standing in the laundry room, watching her light the fire. I'll never forget the black smoke and the screams. After that, I remember everything in flashes. My dad, Grandpa, and Uncle running outside, her being brought inside, her standing in the dining room with a dusty rose-colored towel draped over her shoulders. Her bra had melted to her body. There was no shirt left on her that I can remember. There was a debate about the best way to get her to the hospital, as they lived, and still do, they farm, in a rural area with no emergency services access. It was a good year before she got to come home. She's a tough woman. She relearned how to play the piano. She still grills. She just is hard to get into a picture. She's a beautiful woman now. In spite of the scars, I need to go over and give my grandma a hug. Story 2. Had to put down a kitten that I raised by hand. I raised it from when it was first born. The mother refused to feed it, so I took it on. I woke up every few hours to feed it, bonded with it. It was my buddy. It was about 9 weeks old and would always follow me around on our little farm. Woke up one night to the dog outside barking. He only barked when something serious was going on, so I ran outside. I saw where he was looking, and it was the barn. I heard chickens going crazy. I ran inside and saw my kitten being attacked by 20 chickens. I went in and pulled it out, but it was already badly injured. Its eye was torn apart, paw hanging on by tissue, and when I picked it up, I could feel that its insides were damaged. The nearest vet was an hour away, and my little buddy was fading. I took it outside and set it down on the ground, petting it. It looked up at me, its mouth open, trying to cry out but couldn't. So I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I ran inside, grabbed my firearm, went back out. I gave it one more pat on the head, wiped my eyes, and did what had to be done. I stood there for a minute, dazed. I dropped the gun, walked out into a cornfield, sat down, and just started crying. I was 17 at the time. Will never forget it. In my heart, I know I did the right thing. Some people I've told this to said I was cruel, but I don't agree. It was going to suffer terribly. I ended it quickly. Still miss him. Story 3. I was waiting for a train to get home one day when I saw a man talking on his phone. He seemed to be really stressed and was almost on the verge of tears. I was with a friend at the time, and she pointed him out as well and made a joke that he was probably stressed about a university assignment that she was also struggling with. We kept talking for another 5 minutes when a train started to shoot through the station, and we saw the man run up and throw himself into it. The train started braking right after, and my friend and I were just standing there with our mouths open. I don't really know what happened to the man because my friends started crying and panicking. So we walked away and caught an Uber back to my house to calm ourselves down. Story 4. I was a paramedic and we got called to a house. On the floor was a 7-year-old, laid out flat on his back on a blanket perfectly arranged. It looked suspicious. The mother's boyfriend was there, and he said the child hit his head in the shower, but the child was completely dry. He wore a diaper due to incontinence, and that was dry as well. More suspicious signs. No police were nearby to respond. The child had a serious head injury, and I stayed back to gather equipment while the ambulance crew transported him. The child later passed away. The boyfriend followed in his truck, but the windshield was icy. As he scraped the windshield, he confessed that he had struck the child because he had wet himself. I was later called as the lead witness for the prosecution at the trial. However, the man pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter before the trial. He was later killed by other inmates in prison. Story 5. When I was younger, 15 to 16, I was vacationing in the UP of Michigan with my parents. On our drive back, we saw a car accident that involved a couple of cars, a car boat trailer that jackknifed, and an overturned semi. We called 911, and my dad and I ran up to help while my mom stayed back with my younger sister. I remember running to one of the cars in the ditch that had hit a tree, and the guy driving had clearly hit his head hard. No airbag deployment, but at least his seatbelt was on. His face was so swollen it looked like bloody hamburger. He was in a daze and was like, "What just happened?" I explained and wrapped my t-shirt around his head to stop the bleeding the best I could. I told him not to move, as he could have had more serious injuries and it could have made them worse. I had basic first aid training from when I worked as a lifeguard, for those wondering how a kid knew this stuff. He agreed and just said to help anyone else. My dad yelled that the couple in the jackknife car boat trailer were hurt pretty badly. The passenger had her legs crushed, pinned from the dashboard, which I guess rolled down over her legs. We couldn't get her out. The semi-driver didn't make it. He had been ejected from the semi, likely no seatbelt. It was really disturbing seeing a red trail leading to his body where he had landed and slid down the road. My dad told me to stay away when he checked him and found no pulse. About this time, the paramedics and fire department showed up to do their work, and we backed off and explained what we had seen and where people were that we knew of. Luckily, the guy I helped ended up being relatively okay, minus a bad headache and a broken nose. I have no idea what happened to the car boat couple. I still remember everything about that day, and I'm 33 now. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced firsthand, but I'm glad I was at least able to help, even if it wasn't very much. I still get a Christmas card every year from the guy I helped, telling me how he and his family are doing. Story 6. One day when I was 13 and walking home from school, I saw smoke in the sky around the corner and thought, hey, someone's house is on fire. I couldn't see where the smoke was coming from yet because there was a building in the way. When I got past the corner, I saw a lot of people from my school gathered on the footpath, and there was some obvious commotion. When I finally got into a spot where I could see, I saw a woman in her front yard on fire. Her entire body from head to toe was engulfed in flames, and she was just standing there screaming. Her husband was standing next to her, trying to hose her down. By trying, I mean the water coming out of his garden hose was about as much as my bathroom faucet. I remember thinking, why isn't he turning the water up or making her roll on the grass? Eventually, she fell to the ground and just lay there burning. After a while, I ran home because I was so shocked and terrified. The thing that stuck with me the most was that her son, who looked about 5 years old, was standing nearby the whole time, just a few meters away, watching her. For a long time afterward, when I walked past that house on my way to and from school, there was a black patch of grass where she fell and burned. I later found out her husband had been cheating on her and mistreating her at home. She bought some gasoline, poured it over herself, and struck a match. It made sense why he didn't really try to save her or seem devastated. He just stood there like he was watering a plant, so calm and with so little water. She suffered third-degree burns to 90% of her body and passed away. About a week after the incident, there was a funeral, but that black patch of grass remained for almost 2 months. Story 7. There have been a couple of things that have really stuck with me. The first was when I was young, and a friend of mine got hit by a car in front of school. Although he was fine in the end, with only a couple of broken bones, I was still only 6 years old. It was pretty traumatic. One thing happened this year that really affected me. During exam season, I had something going on all day, so I wasn't able to work during the day. That evening, I cycled to the library at about 10 p.m. On the way there, I came across a man just lying on the ground. He had slipped on a patch of ice and hit his head on the pavement. What really shocked me was that he told me he had been lying there for 20 minutes before I found him, and that 2 people had cycled past and ignored his cries for help. Who does that? He had actually cracked his head open and broken his neck. Who knows what would have happened to him if I hadn't come along? Some people just don't care. What was even worse was that the ambulance took 2 hours to arrive, even though we were less than a kilometer from the hospital. Toward the end of the wait, he kept forgetting what had happened to him, and I had to keep reminding him it was just awful. Story 8. About 10 years ago, when I was new to the animal control field, I was leaving a call and getting ready to head in for the end of my shift. I pulled up from a small street to make a left onto a somewhat more main road, not quite as busy as a main road, but bigger than a residential street. And across the street from me, I saw a bike on its side and a man lying down. The angle made it look like he was lying in the gutter, which, although unusual, wasn't super suspicious because we had a lot of homeless individuals who did that from time to time. But my gut told me I should check it out. So I pulled forward, and the man wasn't in the gutter. He was in the middle of the actual street with some blood behind his head. Luckily, animal control trucks, at least in my state, have amber emergency lights, so I turned them on and blocked traffic, then radioed in for fire and medical assistance. But I'm just animal control, So I'm not properly trained for human emergencies and definitely not first aid certified. So I didn't really know what else to do. I just tried to get him talking to me while we waited and was getting upset because of all the cars and people that had passed him. I had seen them myself as I was pulling up. Finally, a car pulled up and the driver turned out to be a nurse. She got out to help me, and shortly after, the ambulance arrived. It turned out he was cycling to get his prescription refill and either blacked out going off the curb or had a minor seizure. I can't remember exactly. I think he ended up being okay. Story 9. A pregnant woman was completely intoxicated. I was a cocktail waitress and had been serving her all night. Not knowing she was pregnant, her clothes were loose and she was sitting. Well, she got way too drunk, and I told the bar owner, who told me to let her know she was cut off. So she stood up and tried to take a swing at me. I threw my hands up to protect my face and clumsily dodged her hand, so she stumbled and almost fell. She went to the bouncer and claimed I tried to hit her and that I should be arrested because she was 4 months pregnant and I could have harmed her baby. No one knew she was pregnant at all because it didn't show through her clothes. She could have been lying, and I really hope she was, because when I say she was intoxicated, I'm not joking. Story 10. I was working at a frozen yogurt store, and a very elderly couple came in one afternoon. I'm talking 90 plus easily. They each ordered their respective cups of yogurt to go and walked out of the store. On the way out, the elderly woman tripped on the threshold of the door, which to be fair was strangely high up, and hit her head on the sidewalk out front. I immediately rushed to help her, and she had a welt on the top of her head the size of a golf ball. The husband was strangely calm the whole time, while I was completely panicked. I tried to go get some ice for her, but oddly we didn't have any, so I ran next door to get some. I came back with a rag full of ice and asked if she was okay. She looked at me and said, "I think so." As she said this, a sudden stream of blood jetted from her forehead, and I immediately insisted on calling for help. The husband demanded that I didn't. In my adrenaline-fueled panic, I somehow convinced myself that I wasn't legally allowed to call emergency services if someone told me not to. I know now that was incorrect. Anyway, all the while the husband was just calmly eating his vanilla frozen yogurt. After about 3 minutes and an alarming amount of blood, they got in their car and left. I have absolutely no idea if she survived, but my guess is that she didn't. Story 11. While I was deployed to Afghanistan, I wound up doing some work at one of the truck depots near the Pakistani border. We were out in the yard one day while the trucks were filling in and the truckers were taking a break, talking to one another, getting food, etc. There were these kids, boys between 10 and 12, who would usually accompany the adult drivers, and you knew what their role was. While we were working, every now and then, you'd see the truckers call the boys back to their cabs, and you knew what was going on. It's really easy when you're back in the States to say you'd never let that kind of thing happen. It's really easy until you're in a situation where there are only a few of you and a few hundred of them, and it's ingrained in their culture. There had been a friendly fire incident a few weeks prior because someone tried to stop something like that from happening on base, and the local security forces turned on him, and that was on base. So you wind up just trying to do your job and get home, and not let it happen in your own backyard. It's been 6 years, and I still remember the faces of those kids and the way they walked. Beaten down, dejected. I don't romanticize cultural tolerance anymore. The world can be a really dark place. Story 12. The worst thing I saw happened when my sister and I were at a babysitter's house. We had been playing in the sprinklers and inflatable pool all morning. I went back inside, and then I heard screaming and shouting. My sister had sat on a firework that a neighbor's teenage son had been playing with. He threw it over the fence, and since she was only about 3 years old, she didn't see it in the toy car. Her lower body was severely burned, probably 2nd degree. I remember seeing the blood, her skin peeling, and then the paramedics arrived, and she screamed even more. To this day, I do not play with fireworks or sparklers. My dad tried to get me to touch them again when I was 11. I ended up sobbing in a corner and yelling at him. My sister, on the other hand, is okay with them now. Story 13. There was a faint but terrible smell coming from a huge ceramic urn outside my bedroom window. I went out to investigate and noticed it was full of water and had a strange gray scum on top. I grabbed a stick and poked it in to see what was inside. Piercing the surface with the stick was like popping a bubble of the worst stench imaginable. That's when I realized the scum was made up of hair. The water was a rotting pink color, and there was something solid just beneath the surface. I wedged the stick under it and lifted out the now completely hairless and translucent body of a gigantic rat. I could see its organs through its skin. That was when the full force of the smell hit me and I gagged. I dropped the rat and the stick back into the urn and dragged the whole thing to the back of our property, where there was a drop into a stream. And I pitched the whole lot over and ran before the smell got me again. It wasn't a human body or a horrific accident, but that smell, it was absolutely vile. Story 14. I used to work at an airport, and there were tons of dangerous practices. We submitted paper after paper to management all the way up the chain, but nothing was done. Then a union came in and helped us push harder, even though legally we couldn't unionize. Still, nothing changed. A bunch of people wanted to strike. I talked every single one of them down because I wanted to try a more respectful approach and not rely on brute force. We had also signed agreements saying we wouldn't strike, and according to federal law, doing so wouldn't be legal. Then one day a guy I didn't really know who worked with me took a corner toward a plane. There weren't enough staff for someone to stand there to warn others that the engine was running, and the vehicle he was driving had no seatbelt, hood, sides, or doors. As he went to pass, he was knocked off, hit his head on the ground, and died instantly. The next day, they implemented the safety changes we had been requesting for years. If we had gone on strike, we could have shut down the airport and forced them to listen, but because of me, we didn't. The worst part? This happened in 2012. It's not ancient history, and the smell of jet fuel still makes me sick to my stomach. Story 15. I used to attend autopsies and suspicious death scenes for my job. In smaller cities, less than 50,000 people, prosecutors often also act as coroners. One case involved a family of 5 after their minivan crashed, driving too fast in the snow. The father had been drinking. A pregnant mom, a teenage daughter, and a baby all passed away. The young son was rushed to the hospital. The father survived with minor injuries. The floor of the van was an inch deep in blood, and there was a beer can floating in it. The boy stuck with me. He had been sitting in his sister's lap. It looked like he'd been thrown against a wall at 55 miles per hour several times. I attended the pregnant mother's autopsy. The baby was 4 months along. Then there were 2 teenagers who had both allegedly taken their own lives by hanging in the woods. It took more than a week to find them, and they were in terrible shape. I knew one of them. I had cut him a break on a previous offense. His uncle found them. Turns out they had been transporting illicit substances for organized crime. I'm pretty sure it was foul play, but we couldn't prove anything. Another case involved an overweight man who had clearly been attacked. His legs had been broken with a heavy object. He had been run over by a car, and his throat was cut, which was the official cause of death. The body showed evidence of extensive trauma before death. His fingernails had been removed with pliers, his ear cut off, and he had burn marks and other signs of abuse. In the autopsy, all of his organs were covered in thick yellow fat, even his reproductive organs. That experience motivated me to take my health seriously. Story 16. I was the first on scene to a car accident. A couple of friends and I had just returned to one of their houses after a movie. As we got out of the car and walked to the front door, we heard a huge crash. I'm not certain, but I could have sworn the ground shook. I ran up the street toward the sound, and there it was. A car had crashed through a brick wall and nearly into a house. There were twisted arms dangling out of the windows, and the eerie part was how silent it was. I immediately called 911. They asked me questions like what kind of wall it was and how close it was to the house. I was panicking and couldn't really answer. Emergency services arrived quickly, and one of the officers asked if I could stay and help with details. So I stayed and witnessed the entire process. Firefighters using the jaws of life, the victims being placed in ambulances. One of the victims regained consciousness and started shouting, not really screaming, just loudly asking questions, while being loaded into the ambulance. It's something I'll never forget. Story 17. When I lived with my family, my cousin had a girlfriend who had 4 young sons. One night, I was asleep and woke up to the sound of people screaming and crying. My cousin, his girlfriend, and my grandmother specifically. I was terrified because I had no idea what was going on, so I just sat there frozen, trying to figure out what I had just woken up to. Then I heard them yelling, "He's not breathing! He's not breathing!" and sobbing. I was in the second living room, and they were in the first, separated only by the kitchen. I couldn't see them unless they walked past. I saw my cousin's girlfriend walk by screaming, "My baby! Please don't take my baby!" And I realized one of the children was in trouble. I kept thinking, please don't let this be real. But I stayed frozen, unable to see exactly what was happening or which child was hurt. Soon ambulances and police arrived. I saw an EMT walk in and then carry the baby out. The youngest of her children, only 4 months old. I'm crying just remembering this. It was surreal. After they carried him out, everyone followed, and I finally got up. My aunt had arrived, and I asked her what happened. Apparently, my cousin and his girlfriend had arrived at the house with the kids still in the car. They stood outside the vehicle, leaving the baby in his car seat with a bottle propped in his mouth. He had choked on the milk. Story 18. I was an 8-year-old boy, traveling with 6 other people in a sedan. We were heading to Bahawalpur, Pakistan from Karachi. A few hours into the drive, we were just outside the city, going to visit family. My mom, dad, sister, my mother's sister, and her 4-year-old child. Our driver was at the wheel. My dad got a text from a relative. Benazir Bhutto has been assassinated. That's when everything changed. As we got closer, we could see an orange glow over the city, and we heard gunfire and shouting. The driver panicked. My dad had him stop and took over the wheel, then floored it in whatever direction didn't have mobs. By mobs, I mean full-on chaos. Torches, guns, overturned cars. He called one of his army friends and arranged a safe place for us in a military zone called Defense. We made it inside and stayed in a small room for 3 to 4 days. Those days were a blur. All I remember is the constant smell of smoke, the sound of explosions and gunfire. My dad even turned it into a game to distract me and my sister. Guess the weapon by its sound. Eventually, we left in a military convoy. 2 armored jeeps with mounted heavy weapons, 3 troop trucks, and 2 vans with other families trying to escape. The convoy moved slowly, weaving through burning wreckage. Trucks, cars, even bodies. To an 8-year-old, it was the most terrifying thing imaginable. A few months later, back home, I heard an earth-shaking boom. I ran to the roof and saw the Marriott Hotel in the distance engulfed in smoke. It had just been hit by a truck bomb. I've seen a lot. People don't believe me when I say I've gotten used to the sound of explosions and gunfire, but they'd probably misunderstand what I mean. Story 19. I was traveling in India for a few months, and there were families of monkeys that would hang out outside our window every day. They were really cute. Lots of the mothers carried little baby monkeys on their underside. Anyway, this one time, one of the mothers was carrying her baby, but it had clearly passed away. She was still carrying it around. The group of monkeys stopped and were trying to take the deceased baby monkey from the mother, but she wouldn't let it go. The male monkey, possibly the father, then came up, grabbed it from the mother, and threw the body a few meters away. The dad and the rest of them continued on their way, but the mother came back to where the baby was lying and just sat there, poking it and looking absolutely devastated. Then a couple of the other females came and put their arms around her, comforting her. Eventually, she left the baby and walked off with the others. It was so human. I saw plenty of upsetting things in India: poverty, homelessness, illness, deceased individuals. But for some reason, this horrified me in a completely different way. Story 20. This is tame compared to everyone else here, so I apologize. But my cat was hit by a truck. He ran under the deck and laid there, waiting to die. I ran out, and he was howling in pain. He's a fighter, always has open wounds down to the muscle, huge lacerations, etc. That's a normal day for him, and he doesn't seem to care. So him lying there covered in his own waste and blood, crying, was a shock. I knew his spine was broken. I moved my sisters and mom away and loaded him in the car to go get my gun to put him down. One turn away from where I keep my rifle, his leg twitched. I changed my mind, turned around, and took him to the vet instead. He made it. Shattered pelvis, but no spinal damage. Now he's back to fighting raccoons and other cats. But he doesn't fight trucks anymore. He's still my best friend. I love him. But he's always leaking something, so he's too gross to pet. Story 21. I had an internship with my local police department last summer. I want to become a police officer after I graduate this semester, and I've been involved with that department since I was 14 years old. The internship was great, and I definitely learned a lot. However, there were two things I saw that I'll never forget. I was riding third shift one night, and things were pretty quiet. I was sitting in a squad car with the officer I was shadowing, just chatting about random stuff. Then we got a call from dispatch. There was a woman on the phone screaming. The only thing the dispatcher could understand was the address and that someone had been hurt. We responded quickly and were the second unit to arrive. As we entered the front door, there was a body lying on the floor with blood everywhere. The man had been stabbed 9 times by his 15-year-old brother. He was about 26 or 27 years old. The younger brother came out of the bathroom covered head to toe in blood. He told us he couldn't take the abuse anymore and just snapped. It was heartbreaking. The kid seemed like a decent person. He had never had issues at school and was on the honor roll. The second thing happened when a man on a motorcycle decided to go 70 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone. An officer tried to pull him over, but the man sped off. The officer didn't pursue, but followed the direction he had gone. The man's hat started to fly off, and when he reached for it, he lost control and slammed headfirst into a guardrail. He wasn't wearing a helmet, but even if he had been, it likely wouldn't have helped. His injuries were catastrophic. After the investigation, they estimated he was going at least 130 miles per hour at the time of impact. Story 22. In high school, sometime during the winter months around December or January, I was startled awake in the middle of the night by slamming doors, people running from room to room, and the agonized screams of a young man in our living room. I sat up in bed with my heart racing, unsure if someone had broken in or who was out there screaming. I heard people run to the bathroom just outside my bedroom, my mother and a man crying and wailing in pain. I opened my bedroom door, and standing in front of me was the bloodied body of a longtime friend's son. He was only about 28 years old at the time. His stomach was torn open, and I could see far more than I ever should have. His skin was just hanging over the wounds like something out of a horror film. I only had a second to stare before my mom pushed me back into my room and told me not to come out. I sat down in the dark trying to make sense of what was happening. All I could hear was that man crying, "I killed her. I messed up. I killed her." My mom was trying to patch him up and keep him talking, asking him things like, "What happened? Do you know where you are?" And all he kept saying was, "She's gone. Oh no, she's gone. I loved her and I took her away." My mom tried to confirm if he really knew she was gone, and he said through tears that he could tell she didn't survive. Later, my mom explained that he had been drinking and speeding when he hit a patch of ice while turning. The car flipped multiple times. He left the crash site on foot and someone dropped him off near our house because his dad lived with us at the time. He didn't know where else to go. He just knew he was going to jail and that his girlfriend had likely died. She said rescue crews were still working to pull her out of the vehicle when they went to check the crash site. She told me not to speak about what I saw that night to anyone. So I didn't, except my best friend. He was on the run for a while, but eventually turned himself in. I have no idea where he is now or if he's still incarcerated. Living through something like that was a real-life lesson that changed me. I now share this story with anyone who makes excuses for driving under the influence, hoping it makes them think twice. Nothing will ever erase the memory of witnessing someone realize in real time that they had just ended the life of someone they loved and destroyed their own in the process. Story 23. I was driving past a train station when I saw 4 or 5 teenagers pushing around an elderly man. There was a fair-sized crowd of school kids standing around, recording it and egging them on. I hit the brakes, flew out of my car, and went absolutely ballistic on those kids. Mind you, I'm a 5'2" petite woman in my 20s. I ran over to the elderly gentleman, and he was terrified and humiliated. And above all, he was partially blind. I offered him a lift home. After he got in my car, I gave a big speech to the crowd about how they should be ashamed of themselves and how they were the dregs of humanity. As I was driving him home, he started to cry. My heart broke. He told me he had lost his wife a month earlier and that he wasn't allowed to drive anymore due to his eyesight. His wife used to drive him everywhere, but now that she was gone, he had to take the train to bingo and his doctor's appointments. His name was Alfred. I gave him a lift twice a week to bingo, and his appointments until he passed away. Just watching those kids gang up on an elderly man who was clearly vulnerable and frail was one of the most horrifying things I've ever witnessed. It still makes me both sad and angry. Story 24. I was sitting on my bus heading home. Let me sketch the situation. My bus drives past a hospital at one point. I was sitting on the seat behind the door. To my left was a double seat, and in front of that were two single-person seats facing each other. One of them also faced me. Behind the one-person seat facing me was a double seat, also facing me. There was a guy sitting in that seat directly facing me. Suddenly, he fell over. It was on a step, so he hit his head as he went down. The people in the seats near him saw what happened and tried to help. Luckily, the bus driver saw it too and stopped at the next stop, which happened to be the hospital. He called the hospital while driving. We stopped outside the hospital. I looked at the man, and he had wet his pants. There was blood, though not a lot, coming from his eye and mouth. He slowly turned purple and let out a final breath, which is much more unsettling to witness than you might think. He stopped breathing. Finally, the ambulance arrived maybe 4 minutes later. They began CPR. The worst part was that I couldn't take a different bus. I had to wait 15 minutes for the only one that would take me home. I stood there watching as they tried to bring him back. I don't know if he survived. It's terrifying to see someone turn from red to purple to nearly white. Story 25. When I was younger, about 11, I was having a sleepover with my siblings. Halfway through the movie we were watching, I heard something strange going on outside. I peeked out the window and saw a woman running around for about 10 seconds before collapsing in my neighbor's driveway. I thought she was drunk, until my neighbors shined a flashlight on her, and there was blood absolutely everywhere. She had been shot 4 times. I later found out she had been hit twice in the face, once in the chest, and once in the arm. I can't say exactly how much time passed, but maybe a couple of weeks later, I went to the hospital for a sprained ankle. As I was being wheeled in to get it checked out, the same woman was being wheeled in my direction. Some sort of sick wheelchair face-off, I guess. I could see where she had been shot, and the look on her face was painful to witness. Her eyes stayed glued to the floor. She looked like she had nothing left to live for. Did I mention it was her husband who shot her? I don't know. Definitely not the worst thing I could have seen, but it shook me up beyond belief. Story 26. I was in Petersburg late at night trying to figure out how to get back to my hotel. I was walking along the river heading south toward the Nevsky district when I heard a group of people on the other side arguing with a man who had been stripped down to just his briefs. I couldn't make out their faces because it was 3 a.m. and my eyesight isn't great. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, so I kept my head down and kept walking. A few seconds later, I heard a loud splash and saw the man thrashing in the water, completely silent. It was around minus 25 degrees Celsius that night, and there's no way anyone could survive more than a minute or two in those conditions. I crossed the street and got as far away as I could into a more residential area. Luckily, a taxi passed by. I flagged it down and made it back to my hotel safely. I think about that man every day, but there was nothing I could have done to help. Just the day before, I had been kidnapped by a criminal group for insulting their choice of drinks. They drove me around with some intimidating guys and threatened me with weapons. They ended up extorting over 2,000 euros from me, which is why I knew I had to stay out of trouble. The whole experience has left me super cautious and jumpy ever since. I don't know what that man did to deserve such a fate, but I hope it wasn't something as trivial as what happened to me. Story 27. Probably too late to the party, but here goes. Several years ago, I was stopped at a railroad crossing near downtown. I was the second car in line waiting. A little old homeless woman walked past my car, pushing a grocery cart full of cans and her belongings. She passed the car in front of me. But instead of waiting at the crossing, she ducked under the barrier, walked right onto the tracks, and was struck by a train going full speed. It happened instantly. The guy in the car ahead of me and I just sat there as the train kept rolling by, trying to slow down. Then the guy turned on his reverse lights and took off. I sat there imagining how long it would take to tell the authorities what I saw. And honestly, it wasn't much. So I backed up and left too. And it felt so anticlimactic. And that's what stuck with me the most. Story 28. When I was about 10 years old, I was in my grandmother's garage keeping an eye on my younger sister, who was about 4 at the time. There was a box in there that served as a bed for a cat that lived on Grandma's farm. My sister was sitting on the garage floor playing with toy cars, and she was pretty close to the cat's box. The cat was inside sleeping. Out of nowhere, with no warning or provocation, the cat got up, staggered out of the box, yowled, scratched my sister's leg, then suddenly went stiff and collapsed. It started having what looked like a seizure, foaming at the mouth and making choking noises. Then it just died right there in front of us. We stood there horrified. I ran to get my mom and told her what happened. She was terrified, especially since the cat had scratched my sister. I remember feeling so helpless and scared. I had never seen anything die before, and there was nothing I could do. The whole thing lasted about 8 seconds. Story 29. The death of a friend who mentored me through high school really messed me up. He had just turned 20 a little over a month earlier. I was 18 at the time. He passed away on New Year's Eve going into 2014. Only 3 or 4 hours before he died, we were hanging out at my place with a bunch of people, including his brother, who I originally met because we were in the same grade. I still remember the look he gave me the last time I saw him. He had asthma and simply stopped breathing around 9 or 10 p.m. He had been drinking all day and smoking a little, but nothing unusual for a New Year's party. Years earlier, he had damaged his lungs from smoking poppers, a mix of tobacco and weed. His brother woke up from a nap in my spare room and freaked out when he saw a bunch of missed calls from their dad. I just knew something had happened. Everyone else stayed behind as me and his brother, me in shorts and flip-flops, ran out to get a ride to the hospital. I'll never forget the scream his brother let out when he found out his older brother had passed. We both collapsed into the snow. When a mutual friend pulled up, I hesitated because I wanted to tell the others where we were going, but he told me, "You're either coming now or not at all." So I jumped in. It was surreal being in that emergency room. His friends were crying and consoling each other. It was brutal. Before I left the hospital, I smashed my head against the wall a couple of times in the entrance lobby, telling myself I needed to go see him one last time. Without asking, I walked into the room where he lay with his family. I arrived at the worst moment. His younger brother was on his knees beside him, yelling, "Wake up! Please wake up!" The next 2 weeks until the funeral were hell. I started abusing painkillers just to stop crying and sleep. I even nearly overdosed at school. On the morning of his funeral, the power went out and my alarm didn't go off. I got dressed and walked to the church, only to see everyone driving away. Since then, his younger brother and I haven't kept in touch. Another mutual friend of ours, someone we'd known since kindergarten, passed away last summer at 20 from a drug overdose. I think maybe his brother avoids me because all of our memories are tied to the two of them. And I don't blame him. When our mutual friend died, I was angry. He knew what we had already been through. I miss them both all the time. Not a week goes by that I don't think about them. If you know someone with asthma who smokes anything regularly, please talk to them and avoid dangerous substances at all costs. It's taken me 3 years of struggling, but I'm finally seeing a doctor for my mental health. I'm starting college in a couple of weeks as a late starter, and I'm hoping this marks a new chapter. If there's one thing that friend taught me, it's that the universe doesn't always make sense. Things don't always happen for a reason. Sometimes stuff just happens. Also, please take a moment to honor him. He's the one who first introduced me to Reddit. Story 30. This happened just over a year ago. Me and a bunch of my friends went to an amusement park and met up with more people, so there were about 12 of us total. We were almost ready to leave, but decided to get on one last coaster as we walked out of the park. We got on and everything seemed normal. But at the end of the ride, I looked down and saw a man lying in a pool of blood. I was the only one out of everyone on the ride who noticed it. I started freaking out, thinking someone had been thrown off the ride, and I swore I'd never get on a coaster again. But it turns out a man had hopped the fence and got hit by the car in front of ours. It was terrifying because we all just sat outside the ride afterward, not fully understanding what had happened. As we sat there, we saw the ride staff informing the man's wife and kids. Little kids who didn't really understand what was going on. But I can still hear her screaming, "Why did he hop the fence?" over and over again. That part really stuck with me. And the worst part? If he had waited just a little longer, it could have been one of my 3 rows of friends who hit him. It was a suspended coaster. That was a weird and disturbing day. Story 31. I remember the blank stare my mom gave me when she had a heart attack. I woke up to my dad yelling and ran in to see my mom sitting on the floor while he was helping her up. She said she had fallen and was fine, but my dad ran to the phone and called 911 anyway, even though she told him not to. A couple of minutes later, she started complaining of gas and asked for some Malux. As I was about to give her a spoonful, she started rolling around on the bed and then went silent. I yelled for my dad to call 911 again and screamed for her to wake up. As he was on the phone, he asked if she was breathing, and I said no. Her teeth were clenched, and she took one deep inhale. The one thing I'll never forget was how bright blue her eyes were in that moment. I ran out to flag down the ambulance while my dad performed CPR. As I left, I turned back and yelled, "Don't you dare leave me!" and waited outside. When the paramedics came, I ran to my room and prayed and cried until they took her, and later I went with my pastor and dad to the hospital. We later learned she had suffered 2 heart attacks, and I had been there for the second one. The 23rd will mark 4 years since she passed. I just want to say, please spend time with your family. Story 32. I hope I didn't find this thread too late. These events took place about a month ago. My family and I had just moved to Colorado from Michigan. I'm a really big disc golf fan. Since I didn't know anyone in Colorado, I figured disc golfing would be a great way to meet people. It has always been an extremely peaceful and relaxing hobby. At least it used to be. So I was playing at this gorgeous course with mountain views at every hole. I was going slowly because I had my wife, 2 kids, and my brother with me. I let these 2 regular-looking guys play through. One of them was really good. He almost aced the hole I let them pass on. When we reached the basket, he had forgotten his putter, so I ran it up to him. He was really nice and thanked me. At the next hole, they were still nearby. My wife and kids were about 50 feet away when suddenly one of the guys pulled out a firearm and took his own life. It was the most shocking thing I've ever seen. Thankfully, my kids didn't witness anything, but it was still an incredibly traumatic experience. I haven't gone disc golfing once since. That moment ruined it for me. Story 33. Around 2008, I was driving to Connecticut to visit my girlfriend. I was heading north on I-95 in the early evening. Traffic wasn't too bad yet. I was in the middle lane of 3 when I noticed a deer stuck in the median to my left. Presumably, it had crossed the highway when it was clear, ran into the barrier, and now couldn't get back. Then it bolted. The deer made it across the left and middle lanes just fine, then jumped right in front of a huge 18-wheeler that was about 2 cars ahead of me. The trucker swerved and crashed head-on into the median barrier, blocking both the left and middle lanes. Traffic came to a dead stop. I had no emergency training, so I called 911. While I was doing that, a man sprinted past my window to check on the truck driver. He reached the cab, looked inside, and then started slowly walking back along the highway. I was still in shock, but maybe hoping for the best. As he walked past my car, I rolled down the window and asked, "Is he okay?" I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe that the driver was fine and had waved him away or something. But the man looked me dead in the eye with his hollow, empty expression and just kept walking. Story 34. I have watched my son die 9 times. He is still alive, by the way, and doing great. He has a rare disorder that causes him to go into cardiac arrest and stop breathing very easily. The worst episode happened when he was 4 years old and was bitten by a few ants just feet away from me. He's not allergic, but my son doesn't produce adrenaline, and the pain caused him to go into shock and stop breathing. I performed CPR while my 3 other children were present. My son was blue and unresponsive. He was taken to the hospital where a full medical team worked on him for over an hour. He was pronounced dead after about an hour and a half. The doctor actually had tears in her eyes as she performed her final check, and she found a faint pulse. He remained in a coma after that. We were told it was impossible that he hadn't suffered brain damage. I was urged to turn off life support and agreed once my mother could arrive. It took her 2 days to secure a flight and get to us. I even planned my son's funeral with help from friends during that time. But then something miraculous happened. I always used to do a little shave and a haircut rhythm with him, and he'd always respond with the last 2 notes. I was holding his hand and tapped out the rhythm, and he responded with the final 2 beats. I freaked out and told the doctors and nurses. They didn't believe me at first and said sometimes the brain has reflex spasms that appear like conscious movement. I refused to sign a DNR. The next day my son woke up. He had no brain bleeds, no damage. There's no medical explanation for it. I was told that because he'd had multiple cardiac arrests before, maybe his brain had adapted to getting less oxygen, which makes no real sense to me. His condition has improved with age, and we no longer live with the constant fear of losing him. But those first 5 years were horrifying. I pray no other parent has to witness what I did. It took years of therapy for all of us. Story 35. Back when I was a kid, 16, my younger brother, 11, and I were heading home from a party my dad had taken us to. We were on a mountain road, and in front of us was an old yellow El Camino. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No speeding or reckless driving. Then we hit a downhill stretch, and the El Camino downshifted into reverse. The driver had missed the downshift and thrown it into reverse, going 45 miles per hour downhill during a curve. As soon as the reverse lights came on, my dad hit the brakes hard. The El Camino fishtailed, went sideways, and rolled. On the second or third rotation, the driver was ejected out the passenger window. I'll never forget seeing him fly out of the car. But he was lucky. If he'd come out just a fraction of a second earlier, he would have hit a stone wall. A fraction of a second later, and he would have landed on the road. Instead, he crashed through a stand of banana trees and landed in the dirt. If you've never seen one, banana trees aren't hard like regular trees. They're soft, and that slowed him down enough to probably save his life. We stopped immediately. All that Boy Scout first aid training kicked in. We stopped the bleeding, kept him from moving, and stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. Later, we found out he got off pretty lightly. Just a broken leg and some broken ribs. It all ended relatively well, but it was seconds, milliseconds, that separated him from death. He was only 16. His dad had let him borrow the car, and it nearly killed him. It's still one of the scariest things I've ever seen. Story 36. Just 2 weeks ago, I saw a boxer get hit by a car. Someone clearly not paying attention. If I had been the one driving, I would have easily missed the dog. I have 2 boxers, and they're my favorite breed. I'm also incredibly devoted to my dogs because I can't have children biologically. That image of the dog being hit has haunted me since. It brought back another memory, coming home from work when I was younger, and my little brother was about 7. Our mom had bought him a black lab puppy named Pepper. I stopped to get the mail, and Pepper ran into the road to greet me, something she'd never done before. She was only 11 months old. A woman driving by ran over her on purpose. She stopped, backed up to make sure she was on top of the dog, got out, and told me that's what we get for not training her, then drove off. I was too focused on yelling for my brother to grab a blanket. We got Pepper in the car and rushed her to the vet. My brother sat in the back seat with Pepper's head in his lap. I paid $2,400 on the spot for a slim chance of survival through surgery. 4 hours later, she was gone. I'm crying while writing this. I thought I had moved past it, but seeing that boxer get hit reopened everything I've tried so hard to forget. Story 37. I was working in IT at a manufacturing plant. One day I was out on the floor to fix a computer near one of the large machines. While working, I suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream. I looked over and saw a man with his leg trapped in the machine. It was crushing and slamming his leg over and over again. We got the machine locked out and pulled him free. Paramedics arrived within about 10 minutes. Small town, close dispatch. They worked for what felt like half an hour to start IVs. He had lost so much blood I thought he wouldn't make it. His leg was later amputated near the hip. The machine had crushed it from normal size down to about the width of a baseball bat. It was pulverized. I've seen other horrible things, but that one sticks with me. Another moment, I'd hung out with my neighbor and good friend until around 11 p.m. The next day was my first at a new job, and I was nervous. The next morning, I left for work and saw a police car screech up to my neighbor's house. I knew both the officer and the homeowner, so I pulled up, thinking it might be a fire or medical emergency. As I pulled up to the garage, I saw the officer checking on my friend. He had passed away. He had taken his own life sometime after I left the night before. One gunshot. I'll never understand why. He was full of life, loved by many. I miss him often. I still think about his energy, his laughter, and how much the world lost that day. Story 38. My husband and I witnessed, not the actual drowning, but the aftermath of a teen drowning at a local lake. He was out on a boat with a group about 50 yards from shore. They were all jumping off, diving, and swimming around. Nothing out of the ordinary. My husband and I were just sitting on the beach enjoying the day. It's hard to describe, but all of a sudden the entire atmosphere shifted instantly, even before the yelling started. At first we didn't know what was happening, but suddenly there was chaos between the boat and the shore. Lots of frantic yelling and diving, people in full panic. Before we knew it, a body was being pulled onto the beach and an ambulance arrived. The paramedics rushed over and gave the teen CPR for what felt like hours, but it was probably close to 30 minutes. The beach was completely silent. One bystander started a prayer circle, and everyone instinctively joined hands, even me. And I'm not religious at all. It just felt like you needed to do something. During all this, an older man, possibly the teen's father, was making these haunting, emotional sounds I'll never forget. He kept running into the lake, throwing himself into the water as if trying to join his son, and people from his group had to keep pulling him back. He was yelling too, but it was in another language, one of the Arabic dialects, I think, so I didn't understand the words. After the ambulance finally left, so did we. We were glued to the news and internet all night. This was 2002, so it wasn't like today. Hours later, a report came out that the teen had died. They said he was already gone when he was pulled from the water, and that the paramedics were only continuing CPR for the sake of the family and onlookers. 14 years later, it's still the most heartbreaking thing I've ever witnessed. Story 39. It was midday and we were enjoying lunch at a restaurant between ski tracks. We were eating outside because my friend's parents were smokers. While eating, we noticed a rescue helicopter flying overhead toward the mountain. About 10 minutes later, it came back. We watched it hook onto what my friend's dad thought was an avalanche cable. Then suddenly something went wrong. The helicopter lost a major part of its rotor and started spinning, losing altitude fast, heading straight toward the restaurant. At that moment, it was maybe 20 to 30 meters away. My friend's dad yelled for everyone to run and pushed us away. We made it maybe 5 or 6 meters before he shouted again, "It's going to crash on the gas tank. Get down!" Then he tackled both of us to the ground. 2 seconds later, we heard the massive sound of metal hitting snow and concrete. We got up and started running like we were being chased. I made a mistake, though. I looked back for just a second. I can still see it clearly. The helicopter was crumpled, just a pile of wreckage. There was someone trapped where the door had been, the snow turning red. The smell of gasoline filled the air, and though there was smoke, there was no fire. The helicopter had crashed only 5 to 10 meters from the restaurant's gas tank. 3 people lost their lives, the pilot, a rescuer, and a skier. What we don't understand is how this happened, especially since the pilot was highly experienced and had logged over 80,000 kilometers flying in that area. After that, our ski trip turned into paranoia. We were haunted by visions of falling helicopters day and night. Oddly enough, another rescue helicopter replaced it the next day. Every time it flew nearby, we couldn't help but freeze and watch it, hypnotized. Story 40. In the mid-1980s, I was driving north on Interstate 15, heading home from Las Vegas. There's a section of the freeway before the Arizona border where the northbound and southbound lanes are separated by about 20 feet of rocky median. A station wagon was traveling southbound. I didn't see what caused it, but the car suddenly veered into the median and started rolling. It came to rest just past where I pulled over. After that first roll, everything became crystal clear, though parts of it still blur. This all unfolded in under a minute. Something flew out of one of the back passenger windows. It shot high into the air. I didn't realize what I'd seen until later. It was a baby seat. I couldn't tell if there was a child in it. When I concentrate, all I see is a blur. I never found where it landed. Then on the next roll, a small body was ejected from the opposite side. Arms and legs outstretched, it hit the ground hard in front of the car and was rolled over seconds later. But what stands out most is the mother's head. She was in the passenger seat and somehow partially ejected. Every time the car rolled, her head was further damaged. I don't remember how many times it flipped, but with each rotation, her injuries worsened until it stopped. I can still hear the sliding sound her body made as it slipped back into the vehicle. As I ran to the wreckage, I found part of her head, just the forehead, an eye, and part of her nose, and she was crying. I was numb, detached. It didn't feel real. I don't know how long it took for emergency crews to arrive. They kept trying to treat me for shock. I kept insisting I wasn't hurt, just begging them to find the baby. It wasn't until I saw a trail of ants struggling with what I realized was a piece of brain matter that I finally broke down. Story 41. I've had a few intense experiences. When I was 18, I was volunteering as a nursing student in Ghana. One day I was on a bus heading home from a national park when the bus in front of ours suddenly veered into a large ditch on the side of the road, rolling over several times. Our bus came to a stop, and I immediately ran toward the wreckage. Inside, there were maybe 60 people scattered everywhere. Some had passed away, others were in extreme pain or trapped. I quickly realized I was the only person there with any medical training. I tried to organize the uninjured people to help the wounded, telling them what to do. I was running on pure adrenaline. After about 45 minutes, the first ambulances finally arrived. I returned to my own bus, covered in blood, and we continued home. I sat quietly, trying to calm myself down on the drive back. The next day, I went back to work at the local hospital. That shift, 2 of my patients died. I went into a kind of mental state where I couldn't think or function. I felt completely numb. I stayed home for 3 days to reflect on everything. After that, I managed to pull myself together and finish my time at the hospital. 4 more weeks. I saw a lot during my 5 months in Ghana, but I have to say it made me stronger. Another example, 2 months after I got home, my neighbor took his own life. My father and I found him, and we cut him down together. That same night, I went to the bar like nothing had happened, while my father took weeks to emotionally recover. I'm 22 now and have earned my Bachelor of Nursing. I'm currently studying tropical nursing, so I can eventually work with Doctors Without Borders. This is actually the first time I've ever told anyone about these experiences, not even my parents, friends, or girlfriend. Honestly, typing this out feels like a relief. Story 42. I was walking home from school when I saw a kid spinning around in his front yard. His mother was on the porch, and other family members were hanging near the fence looking in. As I passed by, I heard someone say, "There's blood." I was a curious kid, so I stepped closer to see what was going on. The boy was twirling a white puppy by the neck, using fishing line wrapped around it. The puppy was still alive and yelping. Blood had soaked its fur red, and as the boy spun, the blood splattered onto the dry patches of grass. He was laughing, clearly having fun. I looked toward the adults, hoping someone would intervene, but they were just talking like nothing was wrong. Their mouths moved, but they didn't say anything about what was happening. By this point, I had been there for a minute or two. The puppy's neck looked stretched, but the boy kept spinning. The yelping continued, and somehow the dog was still alive. At that point, I just wanted it to stop. I was too young to do anything, but old enough to understand what I was witnessing. I stayed at the fence watching until the puppy stopped crying. Eventually, its skin tore, and the line cut all the way through. The body dangled from torn tissue. I found blood on my t-shirt later that day at home. The body and the severed head were left in the front yard for 2 days. I was 11 or 12. The boy was maybe 5 or 6. I still don't understand what was wrong with those people. Story 43. When I was 7, my 5-year-old brother kept riding a skateboard lying on his stomach down a driveway into the street, along with one of our cousins. It was our grandmother's 80th birthday party, and my mom finally noticed and told them to stop, saying they'd get seriously hurt. She walked away, and as soon as she turned her back, my brother went right back down the driveway and straight under a moving car. He slid underneath on the passenger side, and our entire family ran down the driveway screaming. But he never came out the other side. He was being dragged under the vehicle. The driver didn't even realize. She hadn't seen him from her side. Thankfully, she was going slowly. Once she heard everyone yelling, she stopped. My dad and uncle lifted the car, and my mom dragged my brother out. Somehow, he had wrapped himself around the muffler or something underneath, which actually saved him from being crushed by the tires. But he suffered third-degree burns on his stomach, legs, and hand, and his back was torn open. He was in shock and kept asking, "Am I dead?" He spent a month in the hospital, had to undergo skin grafts and get stitches in his back. It was terrifying. My poor parents. Just 2 years earlier, my brother had nearly died from the spinal meningitis and turned 3 while in a coma. They were finally recovering from that trauma, only for this to happen. The whole car incident shook me. I'd never heard my mom scream like that. I really thought my brother had died. I still remember it vividly to this day. Thankfully, he made a full recovery, and we had fun playing with all the cool new toys he got while he was in the hospital.